The strangest feeling in the world is realizing that people can stop needing you long before they stop seeing you. I learned that lesson on a Thursday evening inside the Harrison family estate. Although at the time, I did not understand how important that moment would become. The dining room looked exactly as it had for decades. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the polished oak table. Tall windows overlooked the dark lawn outside. The stone fireplace glowed softly beneath generations of family portraits. Everything appeared familiar. Everything appeared permanent. Yet something felt different the moment I entered the room. Family members were already seated. Isabel was speaking quietly beside David. Victoria reviewed a folder near the center of the table. Eleanor sat beneath the chandelier with her hands folded neatly in front of her. Ethan stood near the staircase, watching the room with the quiet attentiveness that always set him apart. No one seemed surprised to see me. No one seemed particularly interested either. I took my usual seat at the far end of the table and listened. Several conversations continued without interruption. Then Thomas arrived carrying a leather portfolio. The atmosphere changed immediately. Chairs shifted. Documents appeared. Attention focused on him. For a brief moment, I assumed he was bringing routine legal updates. Instead, he opened the portfolio and began discussing a major decision regarding the future management of family assets. People nodded. Questions were asked. Opinions were shared. The discussion moved forward naturally, as if everyone already understood the subject. Everyone except me. I waited for someone to explain what was happening. No one did. Finally, I interrupted. "I am sorry," I said. "What exactly are we discussing?" Silence spread across the room. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of people realizing they had overlooked something. Thomas lowered his papers. David looked away. Isabel suddenly became interested in her glass. Then Victoria offered a polite smile. "We assumed you had already been briefed," she said. Briefed. The word stayed with me. Not consulted. Not included. Briefed. As though the decision belonged to someone else, and my role was simply to hear about it afterward. Around the table, nobody corrected her. Nobody said the situation was unusual. Nobody seemed shocked that I had not been involved. Across the room, Ethan glanced toward me for a moment before looking away. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than anything spoken that evening. For the first time in my life, I felt invisible inside my own family, and I could not stop wondering how long it had been happening before I finally noticed. The dinner ended, but the feeling followed me long after the last plate had been cleared from the table. I remained seated for several minutes while the room slowly emptied. Staff moved quietly through the dining room. Chairs were returned to their places. Glasses disappeared. Conversations drifted into distant hallways. Eventually, only the crackling fireplace remained. I looked around the room that had hosted countless family milestones throughout the years. Birthdays, anniversaries, business celebrations, difficult conversations, important decisions. Somehow, despite spending decades at the center of those moments, I suddenly felt like a visitor. The following morning, I followed the same routine I had maintained for years. Coffee before sunrise, a walk through the eastern gardens, time alone in the library before the rest of the estate fully awakened. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Once a person begins questioning their place in a family, ordinary moments start revealing uncomfortable truths. Over the next several days, I noticed things that would once have escaped my attention. Meetings appeared on calendars without explanation. Discussions ended when I entered certain rooms. Documents arrived after decisions had already been made. Individually, each incident seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern that became impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I passed a conference room near the west wing of the estate. Through the partially open door, I caught a glimpse of Isabel, David, Thomas, and Victoria gathered around a large table covered with reports. Before I could see more, the door quietly closed. A moment later, the blinds followed. Nobody was rude. Nobody told me to leave. Somehow that made it worse. Exclusion rarely announces itself directly. More often, it arrives through silence. That evening, I spent several hours inside the library reviewing old family albums. The earliest photographs showed holidays, vacations, graduations, and celebrations stretching back decades. In almost every picture, people naturally gathered around me. Not because I demanded attention, because I had always been involved. Then I reached more recent years. Something had changed. I was still present, but farther away, standing near edges instead of centers, arriving after events had already begun, watching instead of leading. The difference was subtle enough to escape notice until someone looked carefully. I closed the final album and stared at the dark windows reflecting the room behind me. That was when I heard footsteps approaching. A few seconds later, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He looked hesitant, as though deciding whether to speak. Then he finally stepped inside. "I thought I was the only one seeing it," he said quietly. The moment he spoke those words, I realized I was no longer imagining any of it. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Ethan remained standing near the doorway while I studied his expression. He looked uncomfortable, not because he was afraid, but because he had reached a conclusion he did not want to believe. Eventually, he stepped into the library and closed the door behind him. The sound echoed softly through the room. "When did you first notice it?" I asked. Ethan glanced toward the shelves before answering. "Months ago." That answer surprised me. He walked toward the desk and sat across from me. "At first, I thought it was normal," he continued. "Families change. Responsibilities shift. People get older. I told myself that was all it was." He paused briefly. Then I started seeing the same pattern over and over again. I listened carefully. Ethan was not someone who rushed to conclusions. If he was concerned, there was usually a reason. "What pattern?" I asked. "The important conversations always happened without you," he said. "Not every conversation, just the ones that mattered." The words landed harder than I expected because they matched my own observations perfectly. Ethan leaned forward. "I started paying attention after that charity event in Boston last spring. You were supposed to be leading the planning committee. Then suddenly the meetings moved. The reports changed. Decisions were made before you arrived." I remembered the event. At the time, I had dismissed it as poor coordination. Now it looked different. Ethan continued. "After that, I noticed other things. Private dinners, closed-door meetings, legal reviews. The same people kept appearing." "Who?" I asked. "Victoria, Isabel, Thomas, sometimes David." He hesitated before adding another name. "Occasionally Eleanor." That answer troubled me. Eleanor had never enjoyed family politics. If she was involved, then the situation ran deeper than I realized. Ethan reached into a folder he had brought with him and placed several papers on the desk. They were copies of schedules, event calendars, and meeting records. Nothing dramatic, nothing secret. Yet together they told a story. Dates matched. Locations repeated. Certain gatherings occurred whenever I happened to be occupied elsewhere. I slowly reviewed every page. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Nobody had openly pushed me aside. Nobody had publicly challenged me. Instead, something more subtle had happened. The family had gradually learned how to operate without me. Ethan watched quietly while I finished reading. Finally, he spoke again. "I do not think they hate you." I looked up. "No," I said. "Neither do I." That was what made the situation so unsettling. This was not about hostility. It was about something far worse. Somewhere along the way, the people closest to me had stopped believing they needed me at all. After my conversation with Ethan, I stopped asking whether I was being excluded and started asking how it had happened. Those were two very different questions. One focused on emotion, the other focused on understanding. During the following weeks, I paid closer attention than I ever had before. Not to dramatic moments, to ordinary ones. The small details often reveal far more than public announcements. I noticed that meeting schedules appeared before discussions took place. I noticed that certain reports circulated among the same people repeatedly. I noticed that decisions often arrived fully formed rather than developing through open conversation. The family had not simply adjusted to life without my involvement. They had built an entire system around it. One afternoon, I found myself reviewing estate records inside the library when Sophia arrived for a previously scheduled legal consultation. She had worked with the family on several projects over the years and possessed a reputation for seeing details others overlooked. What began as a routine discussion gradually became something else. As we reviewed governance documents and organizational records, she started asking questions. Not accusations. Questions. Why had certain committees changed structure? Why had reporting responsibilities shifted? Why were specific reviews no longer reaching the same people they once did? The more we examined the records, the clearer one truth became. The issue was larger than any single decision. The family had quietly reorganized itself over time, not through one dramatic event, but through hundreds of small adjustments. Each change appeared reasonable on its own. Together, they created an entirely different reality. Sophia eventually closed one folder and leaned back in her chair. "I do not think this started with bad intentions," she said. That observation surprised me. I had expected criticism. Instead, she sounded thoughtful. "Then what happened?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "People solve immediate problems. Then they solve the next problem. Eventually, they stop asking whether the system still reflects the values it was originally built on." Her answer stayed with me long after she left. That evening, I walked through the estate alone. The hallways looked unchanged. The portraits remained on the walls. The chandeliers still illuminated the same rooms. Yet I suddenly understood something important. Nobody had gathered together and decided to replace me. The family had simply adapted one decision at a time until my absence no longer seemed unusual. That realization hurt more than open rejection ever could. Because if exclusion happens gradually enough, even good people can stop noticing it. And for the first time, I began wondering whether the problem was not a single person at all. Perhaps the problem was the entire structure we had allowed to grow around us. Once I stopped looking for a single person to blame, I began seeing the family more clearly than I had in years. The problem was not hidden inside one conversation or one decision. It existed in the assumptions everyone had slowly accepted. People believed the system was working because it continued moving forward. Few stopped to ask whether it was moving in the right direction. A few days after speaking with Sophia, I attended another family gathering inside the estate. Nothing dramatic happened. In fact, that was what made the evening so revealing. Conversations flowed easily. Business updates were exchanged. Plans were discussed. Yet beneath the surface, I noticed something different. Whenever important topics emerged, people no longer looked toward me for guidance. They looked toward established routines, toward committees, toward processes, toward structures. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. At one point, Thomas mentioned an upcoming review regarding several major family investments. Years earlier, that discussion would have naturally included me from the beginning. This time, the review had already been scheduled and organized before I heard about it. Nobody intended disrespect. Nobody was trying to embarrass me. They simply assumed the process no longer required my involvement. That realization followed me long after the evening ended. The next afternoon, I met Sophia again. We spent several hours reviewing governance records and historical decisions. As we compared past practices with current procedures, an important pattern emerged. The family had gradually become dependent on systems while forgetting the principles that originally shaped them. Efficiency had replaced wisdom. Convenience had replaced conversation. Process had replaced trust. Sophia quietly closed another file and looked across the table. "The strange thing is that most of them probably believe they are protecting the family," she said. I knew she was right. That was what made the situation so complicated. There were no obvious villains, no secret conspiracy, just a collection of intelligent people who had become increasingly disconnected from the values they claimed to defend. Later that evening, I found Ethan inside the library studying estate records. He looked up when I entered. "Did you figure out who was responsible?" he asked. I thought about the question for several moments before answering. "No," I said. "I figured out something more important." Ethan waited. "The family does not need a different enemy," I continued. "It needs a different future." For the first time since this journey began, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not disappointment, clarity. If the system had drifted away from what mattered, then fighting over old positions would accomplish nothing. The real challenge was building something better. And as Ethan sat across from me beneath the library lights, I began to realize that the future I needed to build might already be sitting right in front of me. The conversation with Ethan stayed with me for days. I found myself paying less attention to what had already happened and more attention to what might happen next. For years, I had assumed that leadership meant remaining at the center of every important decision. Now I was beginning to understand that true leadership might mean preparing someone else to carry those responsibilities when the time came. The more I observed Ethan, the more that possibility felt real. He asked questions others ignored. He listened before speaking. Most importantly, he cared about the family itself rather than the status attached to it. One evening, while rain tapped softly against the library windows, Ethan and I sat across from one another reviewing old estate records. The documents themselves were not particularly important. What mattered was the conversation that followed. At one point, he looked up from a folder and asked a question that caught me off guard. "Did you always know what you were doing?" he asked. I laughed quietly. "Not even close." Ethan smiled. "That is not how everyone talks about you." I leaned back in my chair and glanced toward the shelves surrounding us. "Most people only see the results," I said. "They rarely see the mistakes that came before them." For the next hour, we talked about decisions I regretted, opportunities one almost missed, and lessons that took years to learn. It felt less like a lecture and more like a conversation between two people trying to understand the same problem from different perspectives. That was when I realized something important. Ethan was not looking for authority. He was looking for wisdom. The distinction mattered. Meanwhile, the rest of the family continued moving through familiar routines. Meetings occurred. Reports circulated. Plans developed. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to appear. David seemed increasingly exhausted. Eleanor appeared more withdrawn than usual. Even some of the processes everyone trusted so completely were producing unexpected complications. Nothing catastrophic, just small problems accumulating faster than they could be ignored. A week later, I encountered David alone near the lake house. The exhaustion on his face was impossible to miss. After a brief conversation, he admitted something I never expected to hear. "I do not know if I was ever the right person for all of this," he said quietly. The statement carried years of frustration. Suddenly, many pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. Some people had spent years chasing positions they believed they were supposed to want. Others had accepted responsibilities simply because nobody offered an alternative. As I drove back toward the estate that evening, one thought remained with me. The future of the family would not be secured by protecting old roles. It would be secured by helping the right people discover who they were meant to become. The weeks that followed brought a quiet shift inside the estate. Nobody announced it. Nobody seemed to notice it happening. Yet I could feel it every time I walked through the halls. For years, conversations had revolved around preserving existing structures. Now my attention was focused elsewhere. I was no longer interested in reclaiming influence that had already drifted away. I was interested in creating something that deserved to last. Ethan became a regular presence in the library. Some evenings we reviewed family history. Other evenings we discussed leadership, responsibility, and trust. What impressed me most was not his intelligence. It was his willingness to challenge his own assumptions. Whenever he disagreed with me, he asked questions rather than searching for arguments. That quality was increasingly rare. One afternoon, James joined us while organizing several archive boxes that had not been opened in years. As we sorted through old correspondence and estate records, an unexpected pattern emerged. Many of the family's strongest periods had occurred when people worked together across generations. The weakest periods had occurred when individuals became more concerned with titles than purpose. The lesson seemed obvious once we saw it. Somehow, over time, we had forgotten it. Meanwhile, David appeared increasingly honest about his situation. He still fulfilled his responsibilities, but the pressure he carried no longer remained hidden. During several conversations, he admitted that much of his adult life had been spent trying to meet expectations that never truly belonged to him. For the first time, I stopped seeing him as someone standing on the opposite side of a divide. I saw someone struggling beneath a weight he never chose to carry. That realization changed everything. If David was not my rival, then there was no reason to keep thinking in terms of winners and losers. The future did not require another power struggle. It required a better foundation. As autumn arrived, Ethan and I began outlining ideas for how the family could operate differently, not through authority alone, but through accountability, not through tradition alone, but through trust. The discussions were simple at first. Then they became increasingly practical. The more we talked, the more optimistic I became. For the first time in a long while, I felt useful again. Not because people suddenly needed my approval, because I had something meaningful to contribute. Then, just as that new sense of purpose began taking shape, problems started appearing throughout the family organization. Delayed decisions, conflicting priorities, growing frustration, small issues at first, yet enough to suggest that the system everyone trusted was beginning to strain under its own weight. And for the first time, people started looking around for answers they could not find on their own. By late autumn, the signs were impossible to ignore. What had begun as minor inefficiencies gradually evolved into larger frustrations throughout the family organization. Meetings produced fewer solutions than expected. Important projects moved more slowly. Decisions that once seemed straightforward became tangled in layers of review and approval. Nobody panicked. Nobody declared a crisis. Yet an uncomfortable reality was emerging. The system everyone trusted was no longer performing as smoothly as they believed. One evening, another gathering took place inside the great dining room. The atmosphere felt different from previous meetings. Not hostile, uncertain. Several discussions focused on delayed initiatives and unresolved disagreements. Thomas presented reports. Isabel offered recommendations. Victoria remained composed as always. Yet beneath the calm surface, I sensed growing concern. For the first time in years, people were encountering problems that procedures alone could not solve. At one point, a disagreement developed regarding a major estate project. Various committees had reviewed it. Multiple recommendations existed. Yet nobody seemed able to bring the conversation toward a final decision. The discussion continued in circles. Eventually, silence settled across the room. That was when something unexpected happened. Several people looked toward me. Not because I demanded attention, not because I interrupted, simply because they were searching for clarity. I offered a few observations and suggested a practical path forward. The solution itself was not remarkable. What mattered was how quickly the room responded. Within minutes, the conversation regained direction. The meeting continued productively. As people gathered their papers afterward, I noticed expressions I had not seen in a long time. Respect, not admiration, not dependence. Respect. Over the following weeks, similar moments repeated themselves. Ethan noticed it too. Family members who had once relied entirely on established structures began seeking perspective instead. They asked questions, requested advice, looked for context that could not be found inside reports or spreadsheets. The shift was subtle, but it was real. One night, Ethan and I sat together in the library after everyone else had gone to bed. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the fireplace cast warm light across the room. "They are starting to see it," he said. "See what?" I asked. Ethan smiled slightly. That the family was never working because of the system. The system was working because of the people who understood why it existed. His answer stayed with me. For months, I had believed my greatest challenge was proving my value. Now I understood something different. Value does not need to be announced. Eventually, reality reveals it on its own. And as more people quietly began turning back toward the principles they had forgotten, I realized the family was approaching a moment of truth that would change everything. Winter arrived quietly at the estate. Bare branches framed the tall windows of the dining room, while pale morning light stretched across the polished oak table. Several months had passed since I first realized how invisible I had become. Looking back, the change seemed almost impossible to believe. Not because the family had transformed overnight, because understanding had returned one conversation at a time. The final gathering of the year took place just before the holidays. Everyone was present. Victoria sat near the center of the table. Isabel reviewed several reports. David appeared calmer than he had in years. Eleanor looked more relaxed than I could remember. Ethan sat nearby with the same thoughtful expression he always carried into important moments. Thomas organized documents while Sophia quietly observed from across the room. The meeting began like many others. Reports were discussed. Financial updates were reviewed. Plans for the coming year were presented. Yet something felt different. People listened more carefully. Questions were asked more openly. Assumptions were challenged respectfully. The atmosphere no longer revolved around protecting positions. It revolved around solving problems. At one point, discussion turned toward long-term leadership and future priorities. Months earlier, that conversation would have followed a familiar path. This time it did not. Instead of looking toward titles, people focused on responsibility. Instead of debating who should hold authority, they discussed who had demonstrated judgment, character, and commitment to the family. The difference was remarkable. Eventually, Ethan shared several ideas regarding future initiatives. He spoke with confidence, but without arrogance. He listened to feedback. He adjusted his thinking when necessary. As I watched the discussion unfold, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Peace. Not because I had regained influence. Not because anyone had apologized. Because the family was finally moving towards something healthier than what existed before. When the meeting ended, people remained in the room longer than usual. Small conversations continued beside the fireplace. Laughter returned. Tension faded. For the first time in years, the estate felt less like a collection of competing expectations and more like a family again. As everyone slowly departed, Ethan remained behind. Together we stood near the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, he smiled. "You know," he said, "they never really stopped needing you." I looked across the quiet room and shook my head gently. "That is not the lesson," I replied. "The lesson is that no family succeeds because of one person." Ethan considered that carefully. Then he nodded, and as we watched the winter sunlight fill the room, I realized something important. They had once believed they could move forward without what I offered. In the end, they discovered that the most valuable things are never positions or titles. They are the principles that hold people together when everything else changes.